Aish, I'd like to welcome you to my show. It's a pleasure having you here. I've been on your podcast before, so thanks for coming on. And I've invited you here because I know you're writing a new article for FAIR about General Soleimani, the Iranian general who was assassinated by the Trump administration last week. So welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
First of all, I want to ask you, what does it feel like right now to be in the United States when it looks like there's this whole war propaganda operation starting up against Iran?
Frightening, to be honest, because what you see is that the mainstream media just blindly accepts everything the US government and Pentagon says, and everyone is joining in, and it's lie based on lie based on lie. But if everyone says the same lie, then people are gonna think it's the truth.
Okay, so who was Qasem Soleiman? Why was he important to the Iranian people? Why was he a symbol of anti-imperialism?
He was a member of the revolutionary movement in 1979. And then he worked his way up from a soldier to becoming a general. And he works in the Iranian Special Forces. He's the general of the Iranian Special Forces, and that's a little bit like the Green Berets in America. And in the past few years, he has been basically forming alliances with various Shia factions who Shia, Christian, Assyrian, basically everyone who is not Wahhabi, in order to defeat ISIS. And his strategy was basically what pushed ISIS out of Iraq, to be honest.
Well, how? What was his strategy? What did he do?
What he did was that he formed alliances with, like, say the Assyrians have their own guard, so each local area got its own guard, and they themselves would fight ISIS. So then ISIS did not have a place, like, instead of a centralized military, there was a decentralized, lots of militaries. And so ISIS did not, once they were kicked out of a town in Iraq, they did not have another town to go to. And so they were all pushed into that, like, the near Syria, and now they're pushed up north, and they basically have a smaller and smaller area right now to compete against.
Okay, so why do you think, if he was such an important ally in fighting against ISIS, why do you think that the Trump administration assassinated him?
It's a very good question. If you listen to Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State, he is a religious extremist. And in 2015, he has talked about fighting until rapture. And last year, he himself made a comment that God put Trump into office to protect Israel from Iran. So, and he also is an active member of Christian Zionists, United Christian Zionists of America. And they have a very strange belief where they want to start a war between Iran and Iraq in order to bring about the apocalypse, or Armageddon, or whatever they believe in. And so and if you look at articles from 2-3 years ago, when he was getting first appointed, they do talk about how he uses the Bible as foreign policy guide and all his religious extremism. On top of that, there's Mohammed bin Salman, who's been quoted to say that he has gotten Jared Kushner in his pocket, which means basically he can get the Trump administration to do anything he wants. And those two forces together were able to manage to convince Trump to do whatever they want. The Mossad has been trying to assassinate Soleimani for at least 4 or 5 years. There have been so many attempts that didn't You can read it in the newspaper. And there have been times where Obama has called them off and said, no, don't do this. This is bad. And so I just have to think that it is the strong influence of both Mike Pompeo, a Christian extremist like Mike Pompeo, and also very rich Gulf royals like Mohammed bin Salman.
For example, we have people call it the blob or the deep state, which are all of these institutions behind that work in the shadows behind the United States government. But we know that there's conflict and tension between different actors in the deep state. Do you think there's some kind of internal fighting within the deep state over how Trump reacted over this assassination? Is this going to lead to more conflict inside the government, like between the neocons and the Christian right wing? And
I seem to agree. Trump seems to always do what the neocons. Well, first of all, the Christian extremists and neocons don't differ that much with their ideology. It seems to cleverly line up. And what I notice is that Trump seems to be very accommodating of whatever craziness that the CIA wants. And so I actually don't see this as much as a conflict, as much as interests aligning.
I mean, I know that within the different intelligence agencies, there's a lot of rivalries and a lot of arguments. You know, like military intelligence hates the CIA and vice versa. And I feel like, at least in Brazil, there have been two warring imperialist power factions since 2013, since the beginning of the process of the coup, which is that you have kind of like the Obama neoliberal Clintonian faction of geopolitical actors, you know, and you have this kind of like far right represented by Steve Bannon, Cambridge Analytica, and they're clashing at some point. And so I see like in the corporate Democrats right now, Joe Biden and these people, they're kind of presenting this argument that what the Trump administration did in assassinating Soleimani is wrong because it's not a smart way to fight an enemy. The Democrats would be more efficient and more intelligent with their war against Iran.
Is Iran an enemy? What have they done? The only sin that they have committed is getting rid of the US puppet, the Shah, in 1979. So we need to reject this framework that Iran is an enemy to anyone. But sadly, the Washington Consensus still can't get over, I guess, 1979 and getting rid of the Shah. So they seem to impute motives to Iran, which the government of Iran never claimed to have.
Okay, do you agree with the statement that Iran is a theocracy?
No, I do not. I believe it is a constitutional democracy. If Iran is a theocracy, then so should Israel, England, and Italy. What happened is that you have to remember around 1979, the US was arming all these nutty Wahhabis in Afghanistan. And Khomeini's idea was to tell them mostly the Islamic world, that there is a revolutionary form of Islam that is way different than whatever the Saudi Wahhabi nut jobs. And so that's kind of a lot of it is symbolism. But if you look at the Constitution, minority rights are protected. In fact, there was an article in Mondo Weiss where they went and interviewed Iranian Jews. And apparently the state of Iran actually pays for the upkeep of their synagogue and also pays for children to go take Hebrew school there. Same with Christians. And in fact, the main reason why they have an official state Islam is to prevent religious extremists like the Saudis and the Qataris, who have lots of money, from basically flooding mosques with money and raising extremism.
What about the argument that I saw from some university professor who's claiming to be an anarchist, recently that Soleimani was just as bad as Trump, that he was a butcher, he's bloody, he supports the bloody fighting in Yemen, and he supported the wrong, hundreds of thousands of deaths in Syria and all of this, which is what we see this argument from some kind of, it looks like fifth column actors pretending to be leftists. They are trying to assassinate the character of him right now. What do you think about that argument?
Those are just vague labels. So if he is a butcher, what is the massacre he's involved in? Who are these people he killed? They can't come up with that. So ultimately, it's usually some vaguely Shia faction did something that they did not like. And then they seem to impute everything a random Shia faction does to Iran, which is kind of bigoted. It's kind of like assuming all Jews are loyal to Israel. And in Yemen, I mean, even the UN has rejected the idea that Iran has been arming the Houthis in Yemen, but the Houthis definitely have the right to fight for their right, because in 2015, they basically got rid of their Saudi puppet leader and tried to call an election. And that's when the Saudis started bombing the Houthis in order to reinstall, is it Hadi? Yeah, Hadi, President Hadi, who's the Saudi puppet. So, so each situation, you kind of should not conflate all of them into one situation just because there are Shias involved, because the situation in Yemen is way different and probably has very little Iranian involvement besides a little, maybe some moral support, but not actual weapons. The situation in Syria is an organized militias under the Syrian Arab Army, which is the official government army. And in Iraq, it's more similar to Syria. So yeah, we should not put every action done under one umbrella.
For years, Iraq and Iran were enemies. Now, as a response to the assassination of General Soleimani, the Iraqi parliament has voted to kick the US military out of the country. Do you think that one possible result of this episode could be further strengthened relations between Iraq and Iran?
Absolutely, and it's natural because under Saddam Hussein, Iraq is a majority Shia country, but Saddam Hussein was Sunni, and so I don't necessarily think that the animosity between Iraq and Iran would have existed without Saddam Hussein. And now there is a multi-ethnic parliament, and it's hard for me to understand how the Iraqis, like regardless of their ethnicity, are able to see Iran as an enemy when clearly the US is being more destructive.
As Pepe Escobar always says, there's a hybrid war, a full spectrum hybrid war that's been underway between China, Russia, and the United States for a while now. And in a sense, other countries like Iran and Venezuela become kind of battlegrounds, ideological battlegrounds and things like that. So how are Russia and China reacting to the assassination of Soleimani, and how do you think they will react to this?
They both condemned it. Russia and Iran and Syria have a mutual defense pact since 2015, I believe, where they're supposed to come to each other's aid if any one of them gets attacked. So there is a likelihood that, well, Russia is probably going to line up behind Iran because of that defense pact and because they are aligned with the Syrian government of Bashar Assad. And so I see that. China, I have to believe that I don't know if they are going to want to get their hands dirty, but I also don't see them aligning against Iran either.
It looks like that it might have backfired, Trump's move of assassinating Soleimani, in several ways right now. Do you think he's going to become a martyr? Is he a martyr now? What is his legacy going to be for the Iranian people and for anti-imperialism in general around the world?
He already has become a martyr. If you look at his funeral procession, it has thousands of people there. In fact, one of the Sunni militias in Iraq, they have said that like the first priority is to get rid of US imperialism and that they're joining forces with the Shia militias. And so he has been already a martyr, and amazingly, he has been uniting these disparate factions in Iraq already.
The United States, since the Iraqi invasion in 2003, has employed this strategy, which seems to be based on kind of police logic or whatever, that all you have to do is kill a leader and it kills a movement. But in a lot of cases, we've seen that the leaders are representatives of the base in the movement. So who's going to replace Soleimani? Do you think that tactically or strategically, the fact that he's been killed is going to make any difference in the way that Iran is operating in Syria and in Iraq right now? What comes next?
I guess the Iranian government has already nominated a replacement for Soleimani. I just can't think of who off the top of my head, but that needs to go through their procedure, like their parliamentary approvals and whatnot. So there will be, but what I see is that a lot like Hezbollah, which operates mostly as a protection unit in Lebanon and southern Syria, it has also I've just seen just like an increased amount of militancy against U.S. bases and U.S. presence throughout Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So Hezbollah has come out and said that we need to get rid of U.S. bases. And so that's what I've been seeing, is that like a little bit more unity between factions and a little bit more ideological militancy where they're a little bit like less apt to compromise on this situation.
So in the US right now, how is the media brainwashing the American people to get them supportive of a war initiative against Iran?
Soleimani is a terrorist who is responsible for the death of thousands of Americans. But of course, this is based on the Pentagon figure that they made up. Apparently 600 American soldiers were killed by Shia militias between 2003 and 2007. But then, of course, you have to say, hey, America is the invading, occupying force. And according to the laws of war, the Shia militias have every right to target an invading military force. So that's the one thing. What else? Oh, the fact that he was planning more attacks on U.S. bases. Well, A, there's not a shred of proof that he was, but B, again, the U.S. military base is an occupying force in in Iraq, and the Iraqi people have every right to fight and get rid of them. And so it's like it's like American exceptionalism. I mean, imagine if in downtown Washington, D.C., like right next to the White House, Iran just cordons off like 104 acres and decides, hey, this is going to be our embassy, and we're going to also have do really shady stuff that includes weapons transfers and whatnot, and we're not going to let any Americans in this area. We're going to that's kind of what's going on there. So Iraqis have every right to resist, but somehow in the US, every Iraqi resistance seems to somehow they seem to tie it to Iran, whether there is proof or not.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about General Soleimani, about Iran, and the relationship with the US now?
Well, yeah, in that just don't randomly, just because Washington has a consensus based on the Cold War about who's your friend and who's your enemy, that just doesn't make it real. And also, try not to like believe most papers, because they've been just repeating what the Pentagon has been saying without fact checking. So I would say investigate, don't believe, and also just deal with any news coming about Iran with lots of skepticism.